Chapter 1, Glo- Globalization. Learning objectives. Understand what is meant by the term globalization. Recognize the main drivers of globalization. Describe the changing nature of the global economy. Explain the main arguments in the debate over the impact of globalization. Understand how the process of globalization is creating opportunities and challenges for management practice. What is globalization? The globalization of markets, falling barriers to cross border trade and investment, global taste, benefits small and large companies, significant differences between national markets, products that serve universal needs are global, competitors may not change among nations. Globalization refers to the shift toward a more integrated and interdependent world economy. The globalization of markets refers to the merging of historically distinct and separate national markets into one huge global marketplace. The globalization of production, sourcing goods to take advantage of differences in cost and quality of factors of production. Early outsourcing was confined to manufacturing, technology now used for outsourcing. The globalization of production refers to the sourcing of goods and services from locations around the globe to take advantage of national differences in the cost and quality of factors of production, such as labor, energy, land, and capital. The globalization of production continued. Robert Reich in Global Products, impediments, formal and informal barriers to trade, transportation cost, political and economic risk, coordination. The emergence of global institutions, general agreement on tariffs and trade, otherwise known as GATT, World Trade Organization, International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, the United Nations, General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, or GATT, international treaty that committed signatories to lowering barriers to the free flow of goods across the nation borders and led to the WTO, the World Trade Organization. Policies, the World Trading System ensures national states adhere to the rules, facilitates multinational agreements among members. 164 nations account for 98% of world trade. World Trade Organization, the organization that succeeded GATT as a result of the successful completion of the Uruguay round of GATT negotiations. The International Monetary Fund, established to maintain order in the international monetary system. Lender of last resort, requires nation states to adopt specific economic policies aimed at returning their economies to stability and growth. The International Monetary Fund, international institutions set up to maintain order in the international monetary system. The World Bank promotes economic development focused on making low interest loans to cash strapped governments in poor nations that wish to undertake significant infrastructure investments. World Bank international institutions set up to promote general economic development in the world's poorer nations. The United Nations, peace through international cooperation and collective security, 193 countries, UN Charter, four basic purposes: maintain informational peace and security, develop develop friendly relations among nations, cooperate in solving international problems and in promoting respect for human rights, be a center for harmonizing the actions of nations. I want to go back to that one dot because the print was kind of small, so I mispronounced the word. Actually, it's maintain international peace and security. United Nations, or the UN, an international organization made up of 193 countries, headquartered in New York City, formed in 1945 to promote peace, security, and cooperation. Group of 20, or the G20, finance ministers and central bank governors of the 19 largest economies in the world, plus representatives from the European Union and the European Central Bank, represents 90% of global GDP and 80% of international global trade. Group of 20, or G20, established in 1999. The G20 comprises the finance ministers and central bank governors of the 19 largest economies in the world, plus representatives from the European Union and European Central Bank. Decline in trade and investment barriers. 1920s to the 1930s, barriers to international trade and foreign direct investment. High tariffs resulted in retaliatory trade policies. The GATT lowered barriers. Uruguay Round established World Trade Organization, the WTO. International trade occurs when a firm exports goods or services to consumers in another country. Foreign direct investment occurs when a firm invests resources in business activities outside its home country. Drivers of globalization, knowledge of society and trade agreements. The value of world trade and merchandise goods has grown consistently faster than the growth rate in the world economy since 1950. Trade across country borders in 2.6 times higher than world production. Knowledge society has produced more informed consumers, driving demand, removal of restrictions to FDI, more trade agreements. Figure 1.1, value of world trade, world production, number of regional trade agreements in force, and world population from 1960 to 2020. Drivers of globalization, role of technological change, communications, development of the microprocessor, Moore's law, the overall processing power of computers will double every 2 years. Internet of Things, half the world's population uses the internet. Global e-commerce sells over $2 trillion. The internet is an equalizer. Moore's law predicts that the power of microprocessor technology doubles and its cost of production falls in half every 18 months. Role of technology change, transportation technology. Commercial jet travel, super freighters, and containerization complications for the globalization of production has become more economical. Worldwide communications network implications for the globalization of markets, convergence of consumer taste and preferences, the changing demographics of the global economy, the changing world output and world trade picture. U.S. has experienced a relative decline reflecting the faster economic growth of several other economies. China and BRIC, which is acronyms for Brazil, Russia, India, and China countries growing more rapidly. Developing nations may count for more than 60% of world economic activity by 2025. The changing foreign direct investment picture. Non US firms are increasingly investing across national borders. Desire to disperse production activities to optimal locations and to build a direct presence in major foreign markets. Stock of foreign direct investment, or the FDI, refers to the total cumulative value of foreign investments as a percentage of the country's GDP. The changing nature of multinational enterprise. Non US multinationals. In 2003, 38.8% of the world's 2,000 largest multinationals were US firms. By 2017, 27% of the top 2,000 global firms are now US multinationals, a drop of 236 firms. A multinational enterprise, or MNE, is any business that has productive activities in two or more countries. The changing nature of the multinational enterprise continued. The rise of many multinationals, medium and small sized businesses, internet and lowering barriers. The changing nature of the multinational enterprise continued. The rise of many multinationals, medium and small sized businesses, internet is lowering barriers. The changing world order. Former communist countries present export and investment opportunities. Signs of growing unrest and total total Totalitarianism. China moving to industrial superpower. Latin America debt and inflation are down. More private investors expanding economies. Global economy of the 21st century. Barriers to the free flow of goods, services, and capital have been coming down, strengthened by the widespread adoption of the liberal economic policies by countries that had firmly opposed them. Globalization is not inevitable. Countries may pull back, risks are high. A multinational enterprise, or MNE, is any business that has productive activities in two or more countries. Multinational, meaning more than one, two or more countries. Anti-globalization protests, 1999, protest of WTO meeting, detrimental effects on living standards, wage rates, and environment. This is the globalization debate. Globalization jobs and income. Critics of globalization argue Failing trade barriers allow firms to move manufacturing activities to countries where wage rates are much lower, destroy manufacturing jobs in wealthy advanced economies. Services also being outsourced, contributing to higher unemployment and lower living standards in their home nations. The globalization debate, globalization jobs, income. Critics of globalization argue falling trade barriers allow firms to move manufacturing activities to countries where wage rates are much lower, destroy manufacturing jobs in wealthy advanced economies. Services are services also being outsourced, contributing to higher unemployment and lower living standards in their home nations. Globalization, jobs, and income continued. Supporters argue benefits outweigh the cost. Free trade will result in countries specializing in the production of goods and services that they can produce most effectively. No, not effectively, efficiently. I'm sorry. While importing goods and services that they cannot produce as efficiently. As a result, the whole economy is better off. Companies can reduce their cost structure and consumer consumers benefits. Globalization, jobs, and income continued. Data suggests the share of labor in national income has declined. Share of national income by skilled labor has increased. Unskilled labor experience Unskilled labor experience a fall in income, but not necessarily standard of living due to economic growth. The weak growth rate in real wage rates for unskilled workers is likely due to the technology induced shift within advanced economies. Technolo- Technological change has a bigger impact than globalization on declining share of national income enjoyed by labor. Globalization, labor policies, and the environment. Critics argue labor and environmental regulations. Lack of regulation can lead to abuse. Adhering to regulations increases costs. As countries get richer, they enact tougher environmental and labor regulations. Supporters argue tougher environmental regulations and stricter labor standards go hand in hand with economic progress. Globalization and national sovereignty. Critics argue shift of power from national governments toward supranational organizations, the WTO, EU, United Nations. Supporters argue the power of supranational organizations is limited to what nation states collectively agree to grant. These organizations exist to serve the collective interest of member states. Globalization and the world's poor. Critics argue gap between the rich and poor nations has gotten wider. Totalization governments, poor economic policies, corruption and lack of property rights, expanding populations in developing countries, debt burdens. Supporters argue the best way to change the situation is to lower barriers to trade and investment and promote free market policies. Managers. Managing an international business differs from managing a purely domestic business. Need to vary practices from country to country. More complex decisions required. Need to understand the international trade and investment systems, currency exchange. To all my followers, spring semester 2019, I am taking Introduction to International Business. You have just listened to chapter 1 of the book, the PowerPoints from chapter 1 of the book. I'll come back and I'll also be reading the actual chapter. This can be a resource that you can use to listen to through your headphones while you're busy if you're taking the course. I'm under the weather, so I definitely will work on my reading habits to get better on that. And the print is kind of small, so I had to kind of enlarge throughout the reading, and also my computer was kind of messing up a little bit. So look for more of this in the future, kind of a um, book reading for textbooks through the classes that I'm taking.